Good evening. A warm welcome to all of you to the Wijn Bar in Nepal. I hope you are enjoying the Think Tank conference so far. As all of you will know, this is typically the evening during the annual Think Tank where we hold the gala dinner. And the gala dinner would be in London at a special venue such as the Tower of London or on the HMS Belfast on the Thames. But sadly, that is not possible this year. But we did want to have a special function tonight for those of you who have been staunch supporters of our investment businesses over the years, but also of the Think Tank conference in London. And we know, of course, that with technology, we can do things differently. And therefore, this virtual wine experience. Virtual because we can do so through technology, and wine experience because of the parallels between winemaking and investment management. Of course, in a virtual wine tasting, we also know that you get to taste the wine and drink it, and nobody can judge you for that. But on that note, it is my pleasure to welcome Jeanette Murray, who you all know really well, and Saret van den Heever, who is the co-founder of the Wijn Bar in Nepal, who will take us on this wine journey with them tonight. Over to you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Ferdi, and I'm very privileged to welcome all of you from Wijn in Paarl. And what we're going to have tonight is something quite unique. And it's a curated wine experience, a Wijn experience with wine. So very privileged to be here with all of you tonight and with a very distinguished few people around the table with me as well. I really look forward to the evening. I'm going to hand over to Saret.
Great, thank you very much, Jeanette, and thank you for the opportunity for Wijn to host this first virtual evening for Think Tank. We are really privileged to have you here tonight. And I can also say to all of you at home, with your curated Wijn selection in front of you, you are experiencing the first experience of its kind in South Africa before it is launched to anyone else. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. With us at Wijn this evening, on my right, we have Albert Arends, the owner and winemaker of Arends Family Wines, situated just outside of Paarl. Thank you so much for joining us, Albert.
Thank you very much for having me here.
And then on my left here, on Jeanette's left, we have Daniel Mueller, the CEO and co-owner of the Tour & Private Cellar, just outside of Stellenbosch. And next to him, we have Albie Koch, who's the managing director and also winemaker and cellar master at the Tour & Private Cellars. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we'll hear a little bit more about your journeys, your backgrounds, and also the wine that we'll be tasting with you this evening.
Yeah, so maybe I can start. And Daniel, I'm going to ask you a question first. I think knowing that your whole audience is in the financial services industry, I was fascinated to hear that you've spent 25 years as a Swiss banker, and then you decided to change careers and change your life and come and buy into a wine farm in South Africa. So please tell us a little bit about that journey and just how it is for you.
How much time do I have?
Not all evening, we need to drink some wine.
Okay, that's fantastic. Listen, interesting question. What is it saying? How to make a little fortune out of a big fortune? Buy a wine farm. And I just thought, let's try it the other way around. But having said that, it is all based on a coincidence, to be actually honest with you. About 3-4 years ago, me and my partner, we got offered the Tour & Private Cellar, which during the last 10 years, 15 years, I've been in South Africa. A lot of wine farms got offered to us guys being investment bankers in London and New York, but most of them unfortunately are loss making. So winemaking is or can be very profitable if you run it plus or minus as a company, as a bank, as a wealth management. So keep personal costs low, actually define the right markets where you're actually going to sell the product, and then it works. So then 3 years ago, the Tour got offered to us. We did the due diligence, and I said, let's do it, financed it, and here we go.
And you haven't looked back?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, first of all, South Africa is the country of my dreams. been here since 20 years. I mean, wonderful country, wonderful people. And being in the wine industry, well, not only do I love and drink wine, that's what we actually speaks for all of us, but
Especially in lockdown.
especially in lockdown. No, I've never gone. I mean, when I arrived at the Toren, I mean, they're the famous 4 Ps. You might know about it: product, people, promotion, place. So the Toren, obviously, the product is fantastic. The people were fantastic. They are fantastic as well. Promotion and place. Well, there's a lot we've invested over the last 3 years, but well, the Toren has never been looked better financially than it is today. But then again, I was quite lucky it wasn't the other way around, because product and people would have taken up much more money than the promotion and place. So no. It was a fantastic journey, and it will be even more so a fantastic journey in the future.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for being here with us tonight, both
Thank
of you.
you.
Albert, can I ask you a question? I just actually heard a little snippet now that you've also been in financial services or in Swiss banking before. So that wasn't part of my question originally. Maybe you can slip that in for us. But I'm very interested to know just about your journey as an independent wine owner, winemaker. Just tell us a little bit about that.
So the Swiss part was the bank, Credit Suisse, First Boston, based in Canary Wharf. I love the fact that you label me as a investment banker, but I literally, as you said, it just slipped by. I actually just slipped in with a very appropriate CV. Unfortunately, not on the investment banking side, but on the IT side. So, after studying wine at Stellenbosch, I went to London for some gap years or year and a half of just living in London, and I enjoyed doing it after studying because there was a big exposure to wine, which you don't necessarily get living in South Africa. We get a lot of exposure of our own wines and South African wines here, but in London you've got the whole world at your doorstep. So, friends,
You worked to drink.
I worked and got paid so that I could drink the wines I wanted to drink. Yes.
Fantastic.
So that's what I did basically. But I was on the IT side in the bank. The second part of your question, getting into the wine industry was also something that just sort of happened to me. And as life goes by, you start to reflect back as to how it happened. If you asked me 10 years ago, I would have just said, impulsive decision. No. I'm from Joburg. I grew up on the East Rand, and we lived in Benoni. And from there, every April holiday, we came down to Stellenbosch for our holidays. My parents loved coming down here, guest house, wine tours, and I had to just pickle along and hope for the best that there might be a sparkling grape juice or something of the sort. And I think, thinking back of those years, you realize some sort of foundation was laid down, because that must have had a very big impact, because looking back at the moment that made me decide to go into the wine industry, it was literally 1995. So I wanted to go to Stellenbosch, and they sent me a VHS video back in the day. I mean, the internet didn't exist yet. Yeah. And I was watching the video, and the drama department had made it. And welcome to all the different B's to B, BSc and BCom, and B engineering and medicine and everything and the sorts. And then I liked BSc, and then they said, okay, don't worry, we've got it all sorted out. We'll send you the BSc video. Another 2 weeks later, I got that. And I was watching it on a Saturday morning, and there was literally, all the BScs, even rocket science, But you sit there as a schoolboy looking at it, not knowing of anything, and then suddenly an ambient scene in a winery, barrels, winemaker, and tasting wine from a barrel, and it just grew. That was
Your moment.
That was the moment.
Wonderful. So, Red, I also want to ask you a question. Not only is tonight, like you said, virtually the first virtual ever curated wine experience taking place in South Africa, but we've also had the opportunity to be shown around here at Wijn, which I must say is also a completely unique experience for me, and I think you've got some, fantastic ideas and so forth. So please tell us. I've known Sarette, I'm not sure how long, but she's also been in the financial services industry for 13, 14 years. And you also made a decision to change your life. So tell us a little bit about the concept of Wijn, which I think is wonderful.
Yes, thank you, Jeanette. So as you said, I think there's a common theme running through. Most of us have spent some time in finance.
Poor us staying, you know. I was something like, I'm starting to wonder what's wrong with me.
Maybe tonight is the night that we convert you. Yes, I mean, I studied actuarial science and MBA about 10, 11 years ago and spent a bit of time at Old Mutual and then moved into the fintech industry. And about 3 years ago, I decided to then leave and start doing consulting. But more or less at the same time, or a little bit earlier, we moved to Paul. And Paul has a big wine drinking and appreciation culture. But it didn't have a unique wine bar and boutique shop. And we've been talking about it for a long time, that we need to open this wine bar. And we went on a trip to Copenhagen and came back completely inspired. And I said to Dries and Hanley, my fellow business partners, that, you know, we should stop talking about it and just do it. And I think what makes Wijn unique is really a combination of two things. I think firstly, what we aim to do is to make hard to find and boutique wines more accessible to more people. And by accessible, we mean that wines that usually you can't taste because it's made by an independent winemaker that doesn't necessarily have a tasting room. So we believe that we've really lowered the hurdles of access to rare, exclusive boutique wines that are made by, you know, really amazing producers. And I think there is really quite a strong parallel to Momentum Global Investment Managers, because I think that's what you also do really well in terms of how you select investment opportunities and give access to the investment community to them. And I think the second thing that we really aim to do is, like tonight, to create a community of wine lovers and drinkers that you can sit around a table with the winemaker, discuss the wine, hear the story, and actually just enjoy a great evening together. Because I think coming from the finance industry, there's a big barrier in a way. So you can hardly ever sit around a table with the CEO of a blue chip company and discuss what they're doing in that business unless you're an asset manager or an economist. And the wine industry is very similar. A lot of people think that the winemakers are these mythical creatures living down in the cellar and you can never see them. And that's actually not the case. I think what you'll see...
Well, we'll find out tonight anyway.
They are not that mythical. They do exist. So, I think what you'll also see tonight is that winemakers are true craftsmen and women who are truly proud of what they do. And they really care for the grapes, the soils, and put a lot of their own effort and energy and love into what you are privileged to drink in the glass. And they love to share that passion with you. And I think what we attempt to do here is to really create the platform where you can sit around a table and have a comfortable, informal discussion with the winemaker. And that's also what this experience that all of you are experiencing at home tonight is attempting to do, that in your small 200 ml bottle, you have 2 glasses of Fusion 5, D, White Black, and 70, which wherever you are sitting, you would never have been able to do that in the comfort of your own home, sitting on your couch, next to your wife, or on your own. And through that, we believe we've made that more accessible to you.
Oh,
and we believe there's a lot of parallels between what we do and what MGym does, and that's why we're so excited to be here tonight.
And so are we, and thank you very much for that. She did get paid to say all of that. But, she said it so well. So, Saret, I'm going to hand over to you a little bit. I think it's time that we kind of get into the wine and more of the wine stories and so forth. So I'll sit back and relax and enjoy and hand over to you so that you can facilitate that conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeanette. So this evening in your tasting pack that you have with you, you have 4 wines. So the first 2 wines that we are going to taste together is from Albert Arendt's or Arendt's family wines. So the first wine is what is called the white black. And the second wine is what we call 17. So this is number 1 and number 2. And Albert, whilst we pour the first wine, the white black, and I encourage you at home to actually pour all 4 of your wines, ideally now, so they can get a little bit of air. So the first wine that we will be tasting tonight is called the white black. And before we get into the wine, I think first tell us a little bit about your philosophy of winemaking, which what we call site-specific. You don't, like the Turin, own your own vineyards and your own cellar. You don't own a wine estate. You go and source grapes from specific areas. And I think that's definitely part of what makes you so unique. It's even in the names of the wines that you've chosen. So talk to us a little bit about that before we get into the wine.
We earlier spoke quickly on a little stint in London, but during that time, arriving in London and suddenly being exposed to international wines, and also after studying wine and suddenly having a little bit of knowledge, just a little tiny bit of knowledge that we've acquired of international wines. You arrive in London and you go to a wine shop and you're sort of in your head looking for New World wines because that's what you know. And suddenly you really get intimidated with all these other old world wines because you don't understand what's written on the label. And the big shift in my head was to realize that wine is not, the identity of a wine does not necessarily lie solely in the grape varietal. And that the identity of a wine lies very much so, and even in my opinion, more so in the address, the soil, the terroir, where the wine is from. With that in mind, I came back to South Africa and I was lucky enough to find a job at a winery as winemaker and farm manager of a young Swartland winery, which was actually an old Swartland winery, which closed doors many years ago, as many wineries did in South Africa. The farms were all basically, in a way, consolidated into cooperative cellars, and I started making wine there again. And I was exposed to a group of winemakers with a big passion and aim towards producing address-specific or appellation-driven wines, if I can borrow the name from our European counterparts. So slowly but surely, the move shifted towards producing, at that point where I was in Swartland, producing Swartland-style wines, as opposed to just producing a grape varietal or a blend. So this specific wine in front of us or in front of you at home as well, is called the White Black, and it's a funny name. I always get a lot of comment when I give the name of the wine, and just simple terms, as I explained, address is the most important thing to me. So this wine is a Swartland style white, not from the Swartland, but from a little tiny region, in my opinion, on the southern side of the Swartland, called Voorpaardeberg, and it's in the Paardeberg Mountain, which is just north from Paarl Mountain, and it's a granite outcrop. Although stylistically a Swartland white, the only way I could actually communicate that style was to actually bring the word black in, because Swart black, so I decided to call it White Black, implying that it is a Swartland style white. In the Swartland, there is a clear distinction between 2 styles of whites that have emerged over the last 20 odd years, and the one is the Chenin-led styles that we also do one of. And the other is the non-Chenin-led styles, specifically focusing on Mediterranean varietals. And this specific wine is usually a blend of Marsanne, Roussanne, and Grenache Blanc, all grown on decomposed granite. The wine is very mineral and fresh, and the wine has an incredible aging potential, which is something that many people are quite surprised to hear of a white wine. European people are very used to hearing that. South Africans are generally very surprised to hear that. So, you know, this is certainly a wine that you can put away, and as long as you cellar it properly, you can enjoy this wine happily during the next 10, I wouldn't say more than 10, but I would like to say so, 10 years. So yeah, the white black.
And tell us a little bit about your labels on your wines. That's also pretty unique. Tell us about the process of how you make the labels and sort of what they embody.
When you're packaging a wine, whether you're packaging a perfume, whether you're packaging any liquid, the only moment that you have to communicate is with the packaging. You know, I mean, imagine all perfume being in the same little small bottle. You know, you wouldn't be able to appeal to a certain type of personality of sorts. So I needed to put something on the label that speaks of the vintage. So the idea came to me that what if we did an abstract piece of art on the bottle, not only describes the wine, but also describes the vintage in an abstract picture of color and combination of strokes and so forth. So I started looking at different artists, and I was introduced to an artist. I then started to study a bit and look at his art, and his name is Lionel Smith. He's one of our incredible contemporary artists in South Africa, doing absolutely, and sculptures. He does amazing work. So these specific bottles that you see here, this is my outer label, but if you open that, and unfortunately I can't now, but we do have some older ones here, older vintage ones. I don't know if we can take a bottle, maybe a red. That one's quite light, but we can take that one, and maybe a red.
Bring the black.
Standing around here. What the packaging looks like, and you know, when you open it, there is a. Can we maybe open this one and go through the motion?
I'm going to do this.
Okay, cool. So this is just a previous vintage. I think it's a black actually. And that's what the label looks like, and that doesn't change. That's the same every year, and just the vintage changes. And that's how everybody knows it and understands it. But when you turn the label around, it clearly actually says open year. And when you peel off the layer, the real label is revealed at the bottom. So what we've got here is, we're not tasting this wine. This is not in front of you at the moment. The red is, we're coming to it. I'm just explaining the packaging. But this is black 2017, quite complex. You know, you might think, goodness, it's complicated. But, you know, once you engage with the bottle, you've got the space of the outer label to give you, which gives me a lot of space to write and for you to enjoy. So the inside of the label has the interpretation of every label written into it. And as I'm quite passionate regarding address and where wines are from, if you fold it open, there's a map on the inside pinpointing where all the vineyards are and where all the wines are from. So, you know, something to engage with and a bit of education, you know, because the key to getting to the vision of what we are doing, and not only us, a lot of our friends are doing, is the plan and the idea and the vision of the industry for South Africa and what we have envisioned, and that is to create wines and establish wine regions with identity to the wines, what you pay to the regions.
Our next wine is called 70, and whilst I pour it, maybe just tell us a little bit about where the name comes from, which is very interesting.
So this is Bottleray. This is north-facing slopes, and the name 70, sorry, long answer to get to the question again, is referring to the era of the 70s. I can't speak much for the 60s. I was born in the 70s. I was also privileged to drink a lot of 70s wines. I rented space in a cellar in Bottleray after I left the Swartland in 2009, and fortunately the winery where I was working had a lot of old Stellenbosch wines in their vinotheek in the winery. And I was privileged to have a lot of tastings with a lot of those wines, and I soon realized that Stellenbosch had a very clear identity as to what Stellenbosch wines were in those days, and they clearly started changing when you got into the early 80s. In the early 80s, the introduction of small new oak barrels changed the whole way wine went further on from there. And this wine is a little bit more, a lot more towards the previous style, hence the name 70. And the two varieties featuring the most in the area during that 70s is Cabernet Sauvignon and Cinsault. And most wine producers from the area, for some reason or another, Cinsault wasn't very popular. I'm just talking out of experience of what I've heard. And, but if you think about Cinsault wasn't also regarded as a noble grape. But Cinsault was, however, used in most Cabernets of those years to soften the tannin, lift the fruit. And, Cabernet itself, Cabernet Sauvignon was a very small berry, whereas Cinsault almost looks like table grapes. And, but the combination of the two just seemed to work perfectly. It was sort of like a hush kind of thing. Most people didn't know about the Cinsault, but we're past that, past all of those times, and this is a blend of Cab and Cinsault. Percentages is not something that I really focus on too much. I don't want to write recipes in my head. I want to treat each vintage as it is, and I think that's a last point that I actually want to focus on is my vineyards and why don't I necessarily want to focus just on one property and owning a wine farm. For me personally, my part in this industry is a vision that became clear during the last few years, and that is to try and leave something, for the next generation. And in saying what I'm trying to explain is being part of this creation and identification of appellations, if I can use the word, and creating wines that have identity to these regions. And the concept that I've sort of had is to go and scout for vineyards, but also to establish relationship with many growers and work with the growers to develop the identity of the area. Not just my own personal identity of my personal ambition of wine, of what I want necessarily, but to create an identity in an area is something that you have to do with everybody in the area. Everybody in the area needs to catch on to the same idea, or I need to catch on to the same idea, And the whole idea of sourcing little parcels also has its benefits, because the idea that I had and what I do is to try not to necessarily go to a farm and say, hello, I'm Albert, and because I am, you must give me your best grapes. That's not going to happen, But if you ask for a little bit of grapes, maybe you get lucky, and that's been my strategy all along. So a tiny bit from here, a tiny bit from there, just trying to get some of the best grapes from everywhere where I can, and that's culminated into, I can't actually recall how many vineyards it is in total now, but close to 50 different sites that we get grapes from all over, which makes for a crazy harvest time for us.
I can imagine.
So,
it's an interesting business model and very different to a wine estate, and it brings its own challenges, because you're not necessarily guaranteed that next year you will get the grapes from that specific vineyard. So it does come with a little bit of risk as well.
It does. And that, I think, just to link into the investment side of things, and maybe a last note from my side, I know I'm really anxious to taste the next wines coming. But, the next thing to happen, I personally believe, is the ability to be able to invest and buy and own small pieces of vineyard. If you're in Europe, you can literally buy a row. I mean, in Burgundy, you could probably own half of a vine.
But you have to sell a whole winery here to own that one.
But in South Africa, for silly reasons, you cannot buy a small piece of vineyard. And that is actually so stupid, you know. The wine business doesn't work that way, you know. And I mean, unfortunately, our land ownership laws and the way you can own agricultural land is put into one pot. You know, it needs to be an economical, viable size. And that model just doesn't make any sense to me in the wine industry. Europe is not made that way. You know, out of an investment point of view, you know, something that I would really like to get involved in, and I am already, to an extent, speaking to a law firm in Johannesburg who is willing to pioneer a concept of being able to buy small pieces of vineyard.
Very interesting.
I think that is a very interesting point for the future, because I would love to own my own vineyards. I just don't want them all in the same spot.
Yeah. And maybe just one last point on the 70 specifically. I mean, for most people, it's a foreign concept to blend Cinsault with Cab Sauv, because Cab traditionally it's a fuller bodied cultivar, and then you have Cinsault, which is super light. So those two almost clash in people's minds. What does Cinsault bring to Cab in this specific?
On that point, I think Sense 70 is a bit of coming clean, you know, because I think, as I said earlier on, a lot of cabs, and even the mythological, it's not really a myth wine. If you've maybe heard of the GS cab that was made in 66 and 68, that in fact was also a Cab Cinsault. The idea of Cab Cinsault was not mine. It was always there, and it was done. And specifically why is, as I previously explained, Cabernet has really small berries, which means that you've got a huge skin to sap ratio. That results into huge tannins in a wine. You need something to lighten it up and to soften tannin and to lift fruit. And that's where Cinsault comes along. Cinsault in my cellar is almost my seasoning. And I use it in all of my reds. It's such a beautiful, I think it's the variety that I've got the most different sites of in my cellar, because obviously from each site, each area I'm making wine, I've got a bit of Cinsault. It's literally the most amazing variety to work with to bring out the best out of a different variety.
And then I think you've probably answered it already, but I think most people's preconceived idea would be that a wine like this, because it is a lighter style cab, probably because of the addition of Cinsault, is that it couldn't age for that long. So talk to that a little bit, and also potentially in terms of aging, does it come from how the wine is made in the cellar? Does that determine whether a wine can age or not?
The answer is definitely it comes from the vineyard and the cellar. You can definitely not give a wine aging potential if the grapes are not of the quality to age and contain the correct chemistry, really, to the pH and the acidity needs to be of such to give it an aging potential. But yeah, the other part of your question, you know, Cinsault, the thought would be that Cinsault shortens the lifespan of a wine. And in fact, if you go back to all of these wines of the 70s and so forth, so many of them had so much Cinsault in them, and Cinsault really ages incredibly well, which is a little bit of counter thought, because Cinsault doesn't necessarily have the lowest pH and the highest acidity, but yet still as a grape variety, it ages incredibly well. So the wine style is certainly much softer and lighter. It's a personal style of myself. I prefer to make my wines in a more elegant and softer style. And, you know, in the cellar, achieving that in my winery comes by means of a long time spent on the scheme. So it's actually a luxury of time, because most wineries are designed in such a way that you don't necessarily, as a winemaker, have the worlds of time to spend, for the grapes to spend, the skins to be on the wine. So that sounds a bit confusing and maybe an edit, but skin fermentation and maturation, that sounds better.
Somebody's sitting there, you've just lost me.
Skin fermentation and maturation on the skins is very important in red wine making. I mean, the color comes from the skin. And most wineries are designed in such a way that you don't, as a winemaker, have a lot of luxury in time for the grapes to be in that tank, because you need to get it out to get the next batch in. So my whole setup is designed in such a way that each wine has its time that it needs in each tank. And a short time on the skins would be 3 days, and a long time on the skins would maybe be 10 days in a normal winery. On our side, we spend between 4 to 6 weeks on the skins. And what actually happens is initially a fermentation, and as the fermentation takes place and the alcohol rises and we punch the skins down, there's a lot of mechanical friction, so you get a lot of extraction. You have alcohol forming during the fermentation that acts as an extractant on the skin as well. So you've got a lot of tannins extracting, but then suddenly when fermentation is finished, the contact with the skin, and over time you have almost a now for lack of missing the word now, but a equilibrium that forms. Nature has its way of sorting extremities out. So the tannins, and I mean this is not necessarily biochemically correct what I'm saying, but I mean the longer I keep it on the skin after fermentation, the softer the tannins naturally become. I mean, maybe I can just simplify it and say the wine forms complexes, and the excess tannin binds back to the skin. And that in itself makes the wine very approachable at a younger age. The wine is an 18, but it certainly does not drop the aging potential.
Yeah, because I mean it's really approachable and easy drinking now, and a wine that you can open and enjoy now, but also age and enjoy 5 years from now or longer. Great.
Thank you very much. Salute.
Thank you, Albert. So we're moving on to De Toren next. So we are tasting 2 wines of De Toren this evening. So your third bottle of wine that you will have with you is the De Toren Z. And then the last wine, the fourth one, is the De Toren Fusion 5. So we have these 2 with us this evening, and we'll be tasting the Z first, the 2016, and then the Fusion 5, the 2017. So we have decanted these 2 wines, if I can maybe just quickly get them. And whilst we wait for the wines, Albie, good evening and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sarit.
So Albie, maybe before we get to the wine, tell us a little bit about De Toren, your philosophy of winemaking, and a little bit about your property as well, and where you grow the different grapes and why your property is so perfect for Bordeaux style type of wines.
Well, Sarit, we started 22 years ago, 1998. I was a young winemaker from Elsenburg that started making wine at De Toren, and our philosophy from day one was quite retro in those days. We came in as a young winery in the days of sort of a transition happened in the wine business, wine industry, where people were making traditional South African wines, certain styles. The judges were used to, and we changed the style of the wine that we were making quite dramatically, where we said we wanted to make a full 5 Bordeaux style blend using all 5 classic Bordeaux varietals that Bordeaux uses. Now, first of that was the first for South Africa. So immediately the eyebrows were raised. Why are you using Malbec? Why are you using Petit Verdot? But our philosophy was not to reinvent the wheel, but to perfect that, what the Bordeaux concept were all about. And in Bordeaux, of course, these days, Not all wineries does use all 5, but we could, due to our fantastic climate we've got here in South Africa. We were able to ripen all those 5. So we just used the Bordeaux concept and to put the South African spin on it, basically just to focus on using or crafting Bordeaux blends at the estate. So our philosophy is not complex. We're plain simple, very simplistic in our approach to winemaking. We let the environment, as Albert said, also speak to the wines. That's why we chose where we are, on the other side of the bottle array, which is also granite, decomposed granite. We're about 1 to 1.5 meters deep, and from that we craft the wines. So we focus only on red wines. That is our focus point. A lot of people criticized us for that, for our philosophy, that the risk, you should have white wines, you should have this, you should have that. But in those days, people did that. They try to make everything, but they hardly succeeded perfecting something. We wanted to perfect the Bordeaux concept, and that's what we're all about as Turin.
So these 2 wines specifically is what you would typically call left bank style Bordeaux and right bank style. So talk to us a little bit about what that means and why you've decided to go for both from one property.
Well, the concept or the expression left bank, right bank, of course, comes from Bordeaux, where they've got a river where the 2 sites are. Of course, at the Turin, we don't have the river. We have got the ocean, not that we've got not one piece of land on the other side of the ocean, but we've got slopes. We've got south-facing slope and a west-facing slope. And it is quite noticeable from these 2 different slopes. You find, even if you've got the same variety on the slopes planted, you do find that these terroirs are different. They ripen differently, the sun exposure is differently, and that's why we decided to craft 2 wines from the 2 sites. The Merlot on the south-facing slopes are much cooler, which Merlot prefers, where your west-facing slopes are the ones where the Cabernet Sauvignon prefers the most. But we have all 5 varieties planted on both these slopes, and distinctively they do craft the 2 different wines quite dramatically. We didn't want the 2 wines to be fighting each other. So you would find a cooler slope where we crafted the Torrens Z from, south-facing, facing the False Bay region, and the west-facing slope facing where we craft the Fusion 5. Your west-facing slope is always your second warmest slope in South Africa, where your northern slope is the hottest, but we don't have north-facing vineyards. And your southern slopes are your coolest. It's just to do with the sun exposure, how that is created.
I mean, and the Turin is not a big property, but you get all 5 varietals from the same property. So talk to us a little bit about how you handle your soils to get the highest yield from your vines, because I mean, those practices must be critically important if you deal with a smaller property, but you want to make wines of this quality and plant 5 different varietals on the same property.
Yes, sorry, it's quite unique what the concept, again, criticized for the concept initially, but it's been a concept that's been proven in all over the world, where it's not about the volume, it's about the quality. So we've got 21 hectares, which is about 45 acres of land that we grow our grapes on. And again, here we've looked at optimizing what we grow. It's all about taking any small piece of land and optimizing it to the utmost. So not only are we 100% organic vineyards, we've switched over 100% to organic grapes we produce, but also our planting method has quite changed a lot, or revolutionized compared to what other people are doing. You know, normally when you studied winemaking and viticulture, you would be taught either plant north-south or southwest, east-west, and that's got to do with the sun exposure towards the vineyards. And we decided, no, there's another thing that we should be using in our well planting, and that's called the wind. We get the southwesterly winds blowing onto the land, cools down our land, coming off the False Bay Ocean, which is cold at the Atlantic Ocean, and we should use that to the utmost. So we've actually turned our vineyard rows into the direction of the prevailing wind in the summer, which brings along the cool sea breeze and cools down the vineyard. So you've got a much more moderate growing environment for the vineyards.
Right. And talk to us about the Z specifically that everyone has in their glasses now.
The abbreviation Z refers to a long word, Zephyrus, or not too long. And Zephyrus is the Greek god of the westerly wind. Of course, we get the westerly wind blowing onto the land, and we wanted to call it Zephyrus. And we did research, and there was a car manufacturer that made a car called Zephyr. That's the shorter version of Zephyrus, and that car was not very fond memories of this car, so we decided not to call it Zephyrus, and we just kept the Z. It's just a short name. We wanted something short and something sweet, not too long, and something that people can remember and you can actually pronounce. You don't want a big name that nobody can pronounce, especially our overseas clients that is not prone to the Afrikaans language. So we wanted something very sweet, and that's where we stuck to the Z.
And last point on this wine. So 2016 as a vintage for Bordeaux style in Stellenbosch. A lot has been written about 15 and 17. So 16 almost feels like the long forgotten child.
Yeah.
Talk to us about your 16 vintage specifically.
A lot of the vintages are driven by people, journalists that listens to winemakers, because at the end of the day, the authority of a vintage that lies with winemakers, where they tell the journalists, this is the kind of growing season we've had, etc., etc. And 15 specifically, in general, I think was more seen as big extracted wines. Much more of a, I don't want to call it a South African vintage, whereas the 16 is much more of an elegant, or more a European style vintage. And I don't want to trample on people's feet here, but that's easy to describe. It's more leaner, much more thinner fruit, but more the tannins are much more prone to the wine. Where in the 215, the extraction is so heavy you don't actually taste the tannins. The tannins are there, but they're not just yet showing up that much. So.
Yeah, I think this wine has a beautiful balance of tannin and fruit, and it's almost got a linearity to it, which I think 15 didn't have.
Yeah, and then a lot of people, if you have 15, 16, or which one can age better? I think both can age better. Just depends on how they will change with the age. The one will become much more leaner. Secondary flavors are faster than the other one. So it depends on what you like.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the point, is what is your personal style and preference, and what do you like? Don't necessarily follow a journalist that rates the wine in a specific way.
I think we in South Africa are very fortunate that we sit with very warmer summers. We've got more cooler summers sometimes, warmer summers. But what I wanted to say about that is we can get every vintage, we tend to get ripe, all the grapes. Early ripeness are fine, like Merlots, but even your Cabernet Sauvignons, that ripens very at the end. Petit Verdot, we can still ripen that, which is a benefit to what we have in South Africa compared to sometimes what they have in Europe. I've done 3 vintages in Europe, in France, and sometimes we haven't had the privilege of ripening the late ones. It's nothing against these European countries, nothing. But you sit with what you work with. That's unfortunately that it doesn't always work that way. South Africa, we do get all the varietals ripe every year. It's a given, which is nice.
Definitely.
If I could add something, forgive me, I can't.
No.
But that point, when you go to Europe, everybody has got such a big emphasis on that vintage. And as a young winemaker years ago, when I went there for the first time, I was confused. I thought I knew nothing, because to me it just seemed as if every vintage in South Africa is good. But years later, it occurred to me that it actually was.
Yeah.
And they wish for the conditions that we had. And I'm not trying to say we're better than them, but there is definitely vastly bigger vintage differences in Europe.
Me and my fellow partners decided to invest in South Africa because the thing is, the South African wine industry is definitely, to the outside world, it doesn't have the renommee, the P&R it deserves. but we are working on that.
Exactly.
I mean, we are one industry. It's not Orange Citroen, it's us.
I cannot stress what you're saying more. And I also just want to say it. It's not, we are one industry.
We are one industry, yes.
And that is the legacy that I was talking about earlier. I mean, I just want to play my little part. Really just play my little part. And I mean, in making the wines that I do is really just part of the puzzle of what the South African wine industry should become.
But a lot of our vintage, so to say, our VR, there's a lot of people actually pulling the same strings. A lot of people actually feel, since I'm down here, that they all actually have the same goals, want to achieve the same goals with the South African wine industry, to make them better and brighter. I mean, because people need to know, listen guys, down here, it's a beautiful wine industry with great people and fantastic wine behind. So just try it out. Cheers to that. Yeah.
Cheers to that.
I work now together with my fellow partner and friend Albi for a few years, and Albi knows me inside out. And listen, I'm actually...
Actually, I think that's sometimes too much.
Shall we go down? No, but what I say is quite often being Swiss, lived around the world. I mean, I left Switzerland at the age of 27, 28. Used to live in London, New York, Singapore, Tokyo, wherever you name it. But South Africa was always like, first time ever I actually landed on South African soil was 1997. There's another reason why actually 20 years or 25 years later I invested in a wine farm and in other assets as well, is because I want to give something back to a country which I think it's not only beautiful, but you know the human beings, the people, the citizens in here, and it doesn't matter what color they are great.
On that note, moving on to the last wine, the Fusion 5, 2017. So,
Okay, next one here.
Okay, thank you. So tell us a bit about the Fusion 5 and why the name Fusion.
So just to sort of recap on the Z is of course the Merlot Cab Franc dominated one, the right bank style one, if you compare it to Bordeaux, or your Saint-Emilion Pomerol style. Because of the varieties, it's dominating the blend, but all 5 varieties in there. Fusion 5 is the opposite. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon Malbec dominated blend. Now again in Bordeaux on the left bank, Cabernet dominated, you'll find, but Cabernet and Malbec dominated. It's very seldomly found, or very, I don't know of any blends these days. And initially it was that way, that Malbec played a big role in the blends. They've moved away from that blend in Bordeaux, but I do believe that the trend is coming back, or I've heard that, I can't confirm that. But yeah, this is the two siblings. They're equal in terms of their makeup, in terms of the 5 varieties. Fusion 5, the name Fusion 5 refers to a fusion, a coming together of the 5 varieties. And of course the 5, it's not a V on the front, it's the Roman 5, so it refers to the 5 varieties of that we use in the blend. We even say on the label it's the blend of the noble 5 varieties of Bordeaux. Because in Bordeaux there's 6, but we don't use the 6th one. The 6th one is Carmenère. So again, saying what Albert says, both these wines doesn't have a recipe. I think it's unfair to a vintage to say, listen, this is a recipe wine. People have made recipe wines in the past, and you can't apply that to something that's living. This is a living. Wine is living. And that's where the skill of the winemaker, cellar master comes in, where we taste, we analyze on our taste buds. We see what the wine tells us to do. It sounds very, you walk into a cellar with a glass in your hand, you taste barrels. You see the path of what this wine should be like and how you should blend it. To put it down on paper is another thing. That's why the wines are tasted and then crafted or designed to fit a certain, for that vintage. That's why every year the blend is slightly different. It's tweaked to optimize the vintage. And I think that's what makes wine very interesting. If I think of wine was just a machine where you press 1 + 2 + 3 equals the wine at the end of the day, it would have been boring. Every vintage reflects differently, especially when the wine ages. That's where you really see the difference in the vintages, and that makes it very interesting. Where the wine has aged a little bit, the primary fruit has disappeared a bit, and the secondary mineralities has come through and showed its real colors.
Yeah, I can say in lockdown, we decided to open some of our older wines in our personal collection, and we had a 2005 Fusion 5, which still drank exceptionally well. And I mean, it's 15 years old.
Yeah.
So it can definitely age. And I think as a producer, when you start producing wines that proves that it can age, then you start building up that reputation of your wines being able to age. Yeah. And I think that will help as the South African wine industry gets older and there are more producers that have vinotech wines that proves that it can age. I think the region as a whole will get a better name for wines that can age.
It becomes a proper asset class.
Exactly.
And if you look at Strauss & Co., we've done like over the last few times, Strauss & Co. is auctioning quite a lot of older vintages of a very famous South African wine, and the prices they achieve often I mean, they're really, really great. And I'm happy to see that, obviously, as an investor in a wine farm as well. I like that.
But I think also for Europeans that visiting South Africa, the benefit for that is when they do go to a restaurant, they have the opportunity to have a aged red wine on the menu.
Absolutely.
That's why we keep wine stock back every year, a certain amount, and we make it available to the restaurant trade of South Africa and overseas to our agents. First, invest in a storage condition, whether it's at your home or at a storage facility that can keep your wines at the right temperature, and then invest in your wines, because then your investment in wine makes sense. If your investment in wine, if you don't have the right storage conditions, don't try to buy wines and store them too long. It will be destroyed. But the other way around, you will have that benefit of opening a 20-year-old wine, South African wine, and have a smile in your face that you bought that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was just thinking, it's very similar to the investment industry. So you can be in an investment and stay in that investment for the long term, but if you don't entrust it to the right business and the right managers, yes, sure, you will get the benefit of time, but you could have done a lot better if you actually had the right environment and the right conditions and the right people looking after your investment. Yeah. So very similar in a way.
Definitely. You can look at it as value investment for a lot of wine farms out here in South Africa. Sorry to interrupt. You can look at it as value investment. If you know the right brands, if you know the right red wines you can invest in, it is most definitely a value investment. And I mean, I remember when we've been in Europe for the first time, we do quite a lot of marketing trips together with obviously our cellar master and our head of marketing as well. We travel the world to spread the word about our wine and the wineries in South Africa. And we do verticals. You compare like 10 years of Fusion, 8 years of Z. And they've done it in New York, and you should have seen those faces. I mean, they're all like turned into Sonoma and Napa and like 100 acres and blah, blah. Here we go. South Africa, here we come. It was phenomenal. It was
unfortunately a myth or a historical background that we've inherited as the younger or the new generation of winemakers. And it's for us to break that myth and that label that we were tagged with. But once we've broken that label, I think the future is much brighter for South African wines being perceived. I can just see our clientele, specifically with the Swiss partners, coming to South Africa, tasting the wines, putting smiles on their face.
And I think tonight we've seen two exceptional examples of two very different types of producers. One independent and one which has a long history and heritage and which is privately owned, but both producing exceptional wines in a very different way, being estate wines and site-specific wines, but both, I think, really being extremely positive examples of exceptional South African wines. So I think on this note, I'm probably going to end off the tasting. And from my side, say thank you very much to everyone at home for joining this tasting. All 4 of the wines that you have tasted tonight, as well as the rest of the De Toren and the Arends Family Wines ranges, are available to buy on our online shop, wynbar.co.za. There's details in your box that you've received. And also I would like to extend you the invitation, if you are in the Cape or elsewhere in South Africa or overseas for that matter, and you would like to have a bespoke tasting experience at Arends or at De Toren, please get in touch with us and we would be very happy to arrange that for you. So thank you, Albert, Albie and Daniel for joining us this evening.
You're most welcome.
Jeanette for hosting us, and for Momentum Global Investment Management for the opportunity.
Thank you everyone. Thank you for joining us, and good luck, and just enjoy the rest of your wine tonight. So thank you very much.
Cheers, everybody.
Sante.
Sante.
Something.
Hold tight.
Thank you, Jeanette. What a great evening. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. Both, of course, the wine tasting, but also the stories behind those wines. I also hope that you will keep this date in your diaries for next year, when hopefully we will be able to host you again in London. And lastly, thank you for your time again tonight. Thank you for joining us. We will end with a short video. And on that note, it is a good night. See you tomorrow morning at Think Tank.
We start with breaking news. Wall Street is about to close any minute now. The Dow collapsing around 1,900 points today. Its worst single-day loss ever.
In times of adversity, when the odds are stacked against you, the true mark of strength lies with those who step up to the challenge and say, "This will not be my undoing." Today, we celebrate each and every one of you who would not falter, but instead rose up and held our name high. Success begins with every small step forward, even as the road rises up. Just as steel needs fire to harden, so too are we made stronger by our challenges. As the tides shift and change, victory belongs to those who ride the waves. Bright horizons are conquered by brave explorers who are not afraid of the unknown. Together, we can overcome the challenges we face. Our partnership is our strength. Our solidarity is our shield. Our collaboration is our weapon.